Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and also the host of the podcast here. I'm really excited to have you here with us today. This is one of the many special events we've been doing recently. As you know, we typically have a show every other week, and lately we've been having a lot of kind of special shows as well because we've just had a lot of amazing things that are kind of timely and relevant and that we just wanted to get out there. So we've got another event in store for you today. We're going to be actually talking about an upcoming web conference. And I'm going to be joined here today by a friend, a colleague, Professor Andrew McDonnell. And we're going to be talking about this upcoming event here in just a few minutes. Before we do, just want to let you know a couple of quick things, and I'll be introducing Andy here in just a moment. These events that we do, of course, we do these live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And of course, they are recorded as well. So if you can't watch the whole thing right now, you can come back later and you will be able to watch it on one of those platforms. You also have the ability to come back and listen to it as a podcast. So if you prefer to listen to these things on the go, you can come back and listen to it as a podcast on Apple Music or iTunes, wherever you listen to Spotify, wherever it is that you use to listen to podcasts, you can go and listen to it there as well. Those of you that may not be familiar with the Alliance, of course, we are an organization, a nonprofit, started really to try to make a positive difference. Of course, we are very focused on the use of restraint and seclusion, but many other things that are often done to kids, very often in the name of behavior, which is restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, many things that are often done to kids, often in the name of behavior. And we are really trying to affect change, whether it be in policies or laws or training and practice, trying to influence a positive change. So let's get into this special episode that we have here for you today. And before I bring Professor Andrew McDonnell up on the screen here, I do want to let you know, if you're watching live, I ask this every time, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're from, because it's always fun to see who's joining us and where you're joining us from, because I know we have people that join us from all over the world, so it's kind of fun to see who happens to be on. So with that, let's go ahead and get to an introduction here. And I'm very pleased to be joined by an individual that I would call a friend, a colleague, a fellow troublemaker, and somebody who knows how to make a lot of trouble, Professor Andrew McDonnell. And he is a consultant clinical psychologist to the director of Studio 3, clinical services, director, clinical consultant, and team leader to Studio 3 training. Formerly worked as a clinical psychologist in the NHS until 2002, and as a manager of a service, visiting professor of autism studies at Birmingham City University. Andrew has a particular interest in the design of community settings for people who present a challenge, and he has an extensive experience of working with service users who with a learning disability and or autism who self-harm. And of course, many of you may know we've actually had Professor McDonnell here before to talk about low arousal, the work of Studio 3. And those of you that may be familiar with low arousal know that it's a fantastic approach of working with people. And anyway, Professor McDonnell, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Welcome, Guy, and thank you as well for the opportunity. And I'm impressed with your build up to that and how you did that without catching your breath. So that's pretty cool as well.
Well, I know that when you and I talk, I'll have some time to breathe, because, you know, one of the things I'll share with people that might be watching live is that, you know, there have been many occasions where you and I have had a meeting to talk about something, and we will go down some pretty deep rabbit holes, talking about lots of things, sometimes not at all related to the purpose of our meeting. So I always enjoy our conversations, and really happy to have you here. And of course, we have you here today because we have a upcoming event that is being put on by Studio 3, and we're of course collaborating with you on that as well. And we wanted to talk a little bit about this event. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about you as well. And then we'll dive into talking about this event and why people might be interested and why they might want to go. I had an opportunity the other day. You had shared something with me, which was a article you had written kind of about your journey through a lot of work and really kind of focused on low arousal. And I want to talk a little bit before we get into the event about some of your body work. I want to talk a little bit about lower arousal and kind of where you have been focused through your career, because I find your journey to be, really interesting, inspiring, and the work that you've done there with Studio 3, I think impactful in affecting change. So, those of people that might be joining us that aren't familiar with low arousal in Studio 3, I wanted to make sure that we gave folks a little bit of information, kind of on what that is. So, I'm just going to ask you, tell me a little bit about kind of who you are beyond kind of the intro that I read there, and what your journey's been, and kind of what your, this is really your life's work here that you've been doing. So tell me a little bit more about yourself, if you would.
Passion, driver, life's work. Yeah, as I said, most people, I've had a complicated journey. What you were reading the other day, I think, was about the history of the low arousal approach. I'm actually getting to that stage of my life where I don't really have many filters about being open about the approach, how it evolved. Used to be a lot of secrecy around approaches. You know what it's like in the field. So I trained as a clinical psychologist in the UK in the 80s. Interestingly, there's loads of things we share. I worked in what would be described in the US now as an extreme ABA environment as my first care job. I got sucked into that world for about 3 years because I went on to do my professional training. And about a year after that, I realized this is not me. Yeah, I can quote Skinner. I'm a bit of a nerd academically. I've read everything. People would say things like, well, if you criticize us, have you read the following? The answer would be yes. Yes, thanks. And I think the science side of it attracted me, but what didn't attract me to it was the lack of authenticity about working with people directly. So I worked as a clinical psychologist when I was younger, as I say, when I had hair and I had to grow a beard to try and look older. Now it's the opposite. I'm shaving everything off to try and take at least a few years off. What actually happened was I drifted into, after my training, working back with people with disabilities, mostly in community and institutional care. And I promised myself when I did my training, Guy, and I said this to you before, that I was going to become a therapist, AKA in inverted commas. I want mental health. I enjoyed therapy work, but actually the decision was made for me. And it was made for me by 3 different routes. One was my secret that I now reveal was I have 35 years of teaching a martial art. So before anyone turns off, I'm retired. But what it taught me was to go on training courses in managing violence with that other eye. Now, I believe, as I said to you before, passionately, that what we do in crisis is not about self-defense. It's not about people don't matter. So actually what it trained me to do was to say, whoa, that's dangerous. This is dangerous. So I practiced as a psychologist, and then I was challenged to develop some crisis management training from a blank slate. And that training took off. And then in the mid-90s, I had 3 different jobs. And I was actually also managing a challenging, difficult behaviour service in the NHS in England at the time. And I realised that actually I needed to be more independent and get some like-minded people together. And that's really how the organisation Studio 3 was formed. So my practice is still working with autism, intellectual disabilities, children and adults. I still like to work with people if I can. It's getting more difficult and difficult by the day, really, but I still try to. And what emerged out of all this work was a kind of, initially from the training side, it was, can't we do something a little bit more gentle? Even I call it the bad kung fu. I decided to use every pejorative term that I naturally use. Skills that people forget as soon as they walk out the door. It's a crazy system in the world. So I did my doctorate in that. So I've had that world around trying to train people in alternatives for crisis management, of which this idea of reducing demands in a crisis, being more empathic, trauma informed, I would say, even in the early days before the word was used, and really focusing what I call reflective practice and others do, which is we're not about changing that individual's behavior, it's about changing our own. Mm-hmm. And then what happened, probably in the mid-90s, was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because I kind of then realized existentially, I was on the academic track. I published papers, but that's not me. And actually I realized that I had a great grounding in things like behavioral psychology, family therapy, systems therapy, cognitive therapy, all the bells and whistles. But existentially, I'm a humanist. And I start to realize that actually I should be proud to say that. And most of our work about keeping people safe then drifted into my other work. So the boundaries got blurred. So I stopped writing behavior support plans in the 90s in the traditional way. I just stopped writing them because who wants to read a piece of paper that nobody's going to follow, or very few people do, and it's done for defensive medicine. So it changed my practice. And then when I became independent, one of my fascinations became health psychology, positive psychology. I realized that I actually am a positive psychologist. This guy, you will give me a testimonial. This is what I am, folks, 24/7. My poor wife waits for me to go away from home to give her a break. But what it actually did for me was change it into, somebody called it a low arousal philosophy. I'm not that fussed to say that, but actually the approach started to focus me on stress management, stress reduction, both from a science and a practicality. So these days, if anyone asks me, you're a clinical psychologist, what's your approach? I don't say CBT, PBS, any of those things, ABA, definitely not. What I tell them is, I'm a stress management advisor. Whether I'm working with families, people with restraints, what I'm there to do is to reduce transactional stress between all parties concerned. And it's taken me a long time to be comfortable with saying what I am, as opposed to what I've been trained in over the years. So in a kind of potted history, my organisation, Chili 3, as you know, we're small, but somebody says we punch above our weight relatively. And we have exemplars of our training now in about 14 countries. And it's quite interesting that in the last, say, 5 years, I've noticed we've had 3 spurts in the organisation, none of them planned. And we're in the middle of one now. And it's kind of cool because you're looking around thinking, I have no idea why we're getting this communication from people around the world. We've had the internet a lot longer than the last 5 years, but it's exciting, it's fun. And I think my other job is to get people to reflect on their own behavior. Even when I work clinically with people, forget the client so-called behavior, focus on your own first. Remember, the regulated person will help regulate others, co-regulation. So I'm kind of comfortable now. There's a few more books I'm progressing at the moment. And my fascination is how we get people to just connect with people on that level. And for me, I'm still focused a bit on crisis management. It's not all my work, because the acid test for me of if you value someone is to not restrain them. When they're scaring you, is to take that step back. And that is so hard to do. So I'm a bit of a journeyman in this. And yes, academically, I have published a reasonable amount of articles over the years. They're mostly practitioner based. Most recently, I published an article on the literature on staff training in physical interventions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
It's an industry without an evidence base. I said that in 1990, and in 2024, I can proudly conclude that the same situation is there. It's amazing how a multi-billion-dollar industry has gone around the world with no evidence worth a damn. If the FDA had to give approval to crisis management training, it wouldn't be even in the early stages of approval. But we let the genie out of the bottle because we all want to do good. I love making people feel a bit more confident, a bit safer. But then we make this huge extrapolation that there's an evidence for what we do. Now, there is practice-based evidence. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but when people keep talking about studies, several of my own studies never made it to my final literature review because they weren't good enough. And there weren't that many in there. The temptation was to pad it, drop the standard a bit further to see if I could put a few more studies in there. So it's something I just want to shout out to people sort of around the world, which is we need to start rethinking what we're doing. There's not even great evidence for just teaching de-escalation only skills to staff teams, which is to me the money, where the money's at, and I know we'd agree, literally in terms of making a difference. You try and find studies that say we won't teach any kung fu to people, stroke physical intervention, stroke how to de-escalate, stroke, whatever pejorative phrase you want to use, because it's not there. Now, I'm actually involved with some projects, some of which you know of, where we're going to, in my swan song, I'm going to get a number of these other studies done if it kills me and everyone else in my way, because we need to change the narrative, as you know, in the industry, and actually getting people to first wake up to beware marketing from all organizations. I'd say that about my own as well. There's a difference between marketing and evidence. And practice-based evidence comes from our consumers. That's the other thing I'm passionate about. Talk to our customers, those neurodivergent and other people who are traumatized by these processes. and ask them how they would like to be managed in a crisis. So it has evolved into a bit of a passion. Somebody asked me recently, Guy, when are you retiring? And I really genuinely couldn't answer. Very rare that I'm at a loss for words. I went from this to, what do you mean? You mean go and lie on a beach somewhere? I don't like the sun. If I slow down, I'm not going to be around much longer. That's my epitaph. So
keep on swimming. Keep on swimming.
I want to keep on swimming. Maybe not as energetically, for as long as I can, and as long as I enjoy the work. And I keep telling these people all the time. What I said to this person was, my job is one of my passions. It's not my only passion. I have my kids, I have my family, I have a load of other things, but it's my core passion. Why would I give that up? Yeah. So maybe the analogy is, I'm as hooked as much in this area as some people are on hard drugs. I'm not necessarily going to go from there to stop. And as I said to this person, we were on a cruise ship. I never talk about my job in the other worlds. You know, my wife had deliberately set me up with this person and told them that I was a psychologist. That's a conversation killer every time. I just don't tell people what I do, because when you do, they think you're Mother Teresa or Calcutta, and I ain't that. They start talking about your work, and I just said to this person, only about 10% of people in one of my recent studies say they're genuinely happy and love their work, whatever it is. You know, if you're in that 10%, love it more and appreciate the fact that you're doing something that most people don't experience that. Yeah. I'd like to make that 10%, 90% of our workforce, because I'm into happiness and well-being research. But that's a kind of ramble of where I am, Guy.
Sure. And of course,
collaborated a lot. We've talked a lot, and we talk more because we have similar values.
Yeah, and the other beautiful part about that is that, you know, it's not only that satisfaction, but the work that you're doing is making a positive difference in other people's lives. I mean, I was, again, reading that article recently. I shared that in the chat as well. But, you know, kind of going through your journey and having had conversations with you, I've heard some of those stories kind of firsthand. But, you know, I mean, the impact that, that you've been having, that Studio 3 is having, and it's a time that this continues to be greatly needed. I mean, you know, shifting people. You sometimes refer to yourself as a recovering behaviorist. Kind of, you know, we have many people that still fall into that.
People crazy when we say that. Be careful, guys. There's no one listening to this, are they? I'll get more messages on LinkedIn and hate mail, please.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I don't want to upset anybody right now.
I'm not recovered from behaviorists anymore. I'm now cured. That's going to be the next article. Seriously.
Yeah. But you know, I mean, again, I mean, this journey is a really important one. And I mean, you know, one of the things we talk about a lot here at the Alliance is kind of this whole idea, and back to kind of the recovering behaviors, you know, this idea that, you know, we know better, we do better. You know, the more that we know, and there's so much to be known today, and so many things we can be doing differently. Yet we live in a world, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but, you know, you mentioned on the pre-show, you know, seeing an article I shared about the Judge Rotenberg Center, where we continue to use electroshock on people to control their behavior. So, you know, this work is much needed today. There's been some significant progress, but, you know, it continues to be really much needed.
But we are fighting that darker part of our souls. We can justify anything. We know that from our knowledge of psychology, if we think we're doing good or convince ourselves we're doing good. So, yeah, the Judge Rotenberg Center is an example. I think the other thing that is just fascinating me at the moment is all of my work is really, to simplify it, it's been about empathy, what my colleague Damien Milken calls double empathy, compassion, you know, using a lot of psychological technical language to do it. And I have one thing to thank you for, Guy. In much I read avidly, as you know. The one person I never bothered to really focus on until I think it was 4 or 5 years ago properly, and then you mentioned them as well, was Mona Delahooke, Laurie Desautels. So I have to thank you for broadening even another range of other people in the diaspora, thinking, yeah, these are people who I can relate to. And I don't mean that to say I'm as good as them, but I can relate to their connections and what they're trying to do, reframing things. Let's move beyond behavior. I was thinking at the time, should I send her more? Because I like a joke, as you know, as well, a communication to Mona Delahooke saying, I was talking about beyond behavior long before you, I think, perhaps maybe not. But it's the analogy that we use all the time. Why are we weaponizing it? Why are we demonizing people? If you see someone as a monster, you'll treat them like a monster. we've known this before we supposedly had a science of psychology. So I do have a current pet around that whole area, which is ABA and ABBA. One of these two will evolve into something amazing over the next 100 years. It'll be ABBA, which is the pop group ABBA. As far as I'm concerned, that's the way to think about these things. These are a joke and a judgment in time. I used that joke to a bunch of behavior analysts, and some of them went onto Google to find out what ABBA was. No, it's ABBA. We get passionate, and then we turn things almost into a messianic cult-like thing. Even these days, I mean, we're in an era where everyone thinks there's nothing wrong with mindfulness if you have a passion for it and it's going to work for you. But like most of our interventions, they only really, they rely an awful lot, not just on evidence, but the beliefs of the people with them who engage in them. So if we're going to look at stress management, for example, we need to respect all the different ways of reducing your stress, from a hobby or an interest. Exercise. I mean, I think I was saying to somebody recently, I exercise routinely. I pay someone. I'm middle class, as you would say in the States. I pay someone to force me to do cardiac exercise twice a week. And if I didn't pay them, I wouldn't do it because I'm lazy, quintessentially. And I don't like, even though I taught a martial arts at a high level and I was physically super fit when I was younger, I actually never liked exercise since the day I was born, ever. So when people talk about endorphin highs, it now is even more knowledgeable that all I get is pain. But somebody asked me, why do I do it? If you look at the studies on cortisol depletion, that's one of our major stress hormonal pathways. The only thing that's evidence-based that reduces that over a consistent period of time is burst cardio. And the problem is it takes a lot of it and quite a long time to get to a stable period. So in my clinical work, I'm actually using some of this evidence to say, I'm sorry, I do have a way to help you regulate someone a bit, but it's not going to be a quick fix. One thing only, but it's one of the many tools that you have around. We're looking at something at the moment, Guy, that you'd be interested in, which is less than 10% of our workforce in our care area actually bother to do anything related to stress management skills for themselves, regardless of age. Now, you're working with people who are traumatized, who are complex, it's stressful, the job, yet we still seem to be struggling to convince our work first to do the self-regulatory things that they really should do. The number goes up dramatically over one thing. If you ask people, do you have a passion, a hobby, or an interest that really switches your mind off, it goes up to about 30-35%, because most people don't consider that a stress management tool. I'm passionate about reading. I get into a flow state. I tune out from the world around me. Or chess. Mine used to be internet chess, but it's not anymore because I'm sick and tired of 8-year-olds beating me, mostly from the Far East, and taunting me as well. It's no longer I used to be quite good at chess when I was young. Now in cognitive decline, I've now decided it's not a good stress management tool for me anymore, especially the humiliation of being beaten by some protege from somewhere. And instead of taking pride in that, I'm still a fractured human being and work in progress, guys. I have to accept through gritted teeth or hit the congratulations, very well played. That was an excellent move, by the way. So we've all got to develop our own strategies, and that's something I'm passionate about now.
Sure.
So that's one of my fascinations.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing some of your journey and your work. And of course, you've got a couple of books out there that we've talked about the reflective journey, kind of talking about low arousal. You've got a book about restraint as well, the freedom from restraint and seclusion. Have done a lot of work kind of around reducing the use of restraint. What's that?
50 published articles. It's not great.
A few for sure. Yeah. And of course, mentioned collaboration, and you're right. It's been a few years now that we've been connected and looking for occasional opportunities to collaborate, whether it's on the podcast or otherwise. And you mentioned Mona and Lori. I actually exchanged a text exchange with Mona this morning, and I'm happy to see that she continues to recover, and I think we're going to be hopefully seeing and hearing more from Mona in the future here as well. So that's fantastic. But I want to talk about one of our current collaborations here. And really what we wanted to talk about today is this amazing event that's coming up. And I'm actually going to go ahead and bring up the event info on our screen here. So
Cool.
Give me 1 second as I pull this up. But we have, you had reached out to me at one point about an event that you were planning and said, hey, would you have any interest in kind of collaborating around this? And of course, my gut response to anything collaborative is usually yes. And if you're telling me to do something, then absolutely it's going to be a yes as well. So you began to tell me about this event that you were planning, and it sounded like a great opportunity. So I've just brought up on the screen here a little bit of information about the event, but it's an event coming up here in October, and it's called Making Sense of a Chaotic World, Brain, Body, and Beyond. And I wonder if you might tell our audience a little bit about this event and kind of what the focus of this event is going to be.
The event is actually bringing some practitioners that I kind of see looking, they do collaborate a bit, but they're looking at this idea of making the world safer and more predictable. So the idea is to get them on a webinar to reach the largest audience possible, because they're all what I would call pracademics. Kelly Marler would hate me for saying that, but they're people who have an approach to understanding chaos, not just for people with autism, but other related neurodiverse conditions. And of course, my interest is in stress. So I have done events with Kelly Marler. I've done events with Peter Vermeulen quite a lot, my colleague from Belgium, who's an amazing communicator. He's written over 15 books, and I'm jealous. But the point about it is that his work originally focuses on how we cognitively become even stressed. And it's a cognitive model by making what he calls prediction errors from the neuroscience research, that we become confused, we then become overwhelmed. That's the kind of logic. And obviously, a lot of his work is in autism, where he has demonstrated in practical ways where individuals make these sort of prediction errors. So it's kind of an assumption to say, well, to an awful lot of people who are on the spectrum, we can really functionally define it as people trying to make sense of a chaotic world. Everything seems chaotic to them, and the more stressed they become, the more they need predictability to feel safe. So Peter's someone I've known his work for an awful long time, and we've collaborated. On the other hand as well, we have Kelly Marler and a UK colleague of hers, Rachel Thompson, who, to me, look at that other part of the world. I'm not being too linear. Vermeulen looking at that kind of source of chaos in the external world. But Kelly Marler is one of the first people I ever heard. And again, I think she's one of the most accomplished practitioners on the planet. I hope she's not listening. I said to her once, praise is something that should be very used sparingly. That's the kind of Irish household I grew up in. But you're pretty darn good and impressive. So her work related to others on introception, how we process information from our body, also fits that same predictive brain model, as we would call it, that I can't decide between whether I'm hungry or angry, the old joke. I might have some weird sensory experiences in my body, which Rachel will talk about from a very practical point of view, and that may lead to panic. Now, one of the reasons why this is so important to look at the internal and external world is we've worked with individuals where we would say their mood seems to have changed today, and then we want to add the word disorder to it, rather than actually saying, is this an interoceptive interactional problem? Has this person got a minor bug, ailment, not feeling well, but can't really report it? Are they confused about internal stimuli because they're stressed? With Peter, the external world. So the idea behind this event is to get people, and there's, a modest fourth contributor, hopefully at the end, when all the smart people have really talked, I'll be talking about how we reduce stress, how we make the world less chaotic, based on what the other guys have really put together. I have to say, I've become more of a fan of trying to do events where we can have as broad and diverse an audience as possible. So as we said, Guy, this isn't just for professionals. It's for anyone who's with lived experience, anyone who is trying to navigate this chaos with people all the time. And of course, my message for my part of it is very simple. When people are in total chaos and they're melting down and the world is confusion, that was what low arousal was originally designed for. How can I keep someone emotionally contained? And to do that, I have to contain my own behavior first, not theirs. So the mixture of people, I've heard Rachel sort of indirectly talk once, and Kelly really rates her, and they've done a lot of collaborations. So what we've been trying to do for this event with this great person who's going to MC it, called Guy, from that, and we can expect us all to ask probing questions, is the idea behind it is to really give people a sense of something that's practitioner-based and authentic. Two different bits of work. I mean, Peter draws dramatically from neuroscience research. He's like an open book in that area. Kelly does the same. And I know the two of them collaborate. And we just thought, what a wonderful thing to do for people connected to us around the world, to hear people that sometimes it's quite expensive to get them in one place. So the thought was not just a quick webinar, but actually to have podcast afterwards, to really break that down, to allow dialogue and conversations, actually just to give people the chance to really just think about, does this make sense to me and how I work or the child I support? Sometimes when I see that person wake up in the morning and they just seem to be in a bad mood, Kelly would say, think of interoception. Can they tell you whether they've got a pain, whether they're feeling a bit weird, whether they're sensorily overwhelmed, something that's internal to them? Peter would say the same thing about when we look at people, we need to look at it from, again, their point of view. You know, people struggle with different contexts. He was actually one of the first people who reinforced for me many years ago, why were we trying to teach people as mad behaviorists to generalize skills from one setting to another when each context is different? And then I heard this very educated colleague talk about context and context blindness, which is not what he would use now, but how people struggle to relate to different contexts. And now we are much more accepting the fact that all of our behaviors are context driven. When you're at home, Guy, you probably obey some different rules than when you're at work. When you are out and about, there are other rules. Contexts have rules attached to them, which lead to confusion for people. You know, it's hard enough for us to work out subtle social rules. For the people we support who are neurodiverse particularly, it's a complete mystery half the time. Mm-hmm. And consider the fact that I was working with somebody recently, to give you an example. She's a young woman who's had every label under the sun. That's the usual thing. What label don't you get given?
Right.
Yeah, there's not a DSM category yet for I don't know, which I think would be a very good category if we gave it to psychiatrists, or ICD-12. And this young woman has the label of an eating disorder, but she has a diagnosis of autism. She sees the world very differently. She's rigid in her thinking, common to eating disorders. She has repetitive behaviors and rituals. She's had these since she's a child, but she's also got a problem about regulating and feedback in her body. And it's bigger than just body image. Now, if you take the work of Kelly Marler, the work of Peter Vermeulen, what it would say is, I shouldn't just be labeling her as a person now who her personality is, you have an eating disorder. I should be looking at how this person processes information and why they're sometimes terrified about food, why they're sensorily overwhelmed. So I've encouraged all the contributors to make sure they use lots of personal, I can anonymize them, examples, and we're going to encourage the audience not just to leave the chat open at the event, but afterwards too. I didn't tell you, Guy, you and I got a bit of work to do because we're probably going to have to do a follow-up mini event for all the questions that come in afterwards that we've attempted to answer. And you and I are going to be the filters for that, apparently. I don't know if we told you that.
Well, yeah, you know, I'm signed on for whatever you tell me to do. So,
but I think the idea of understanding these, it's not all about the science, but interoception, our body, exteroception, the world around us. We've got to get away from this old brain, and Mona Denhook talks about this as well. Laurie does that. A number of people say the same thing. This simplification of our brain processes. We are fraught with biases. Our brains are hardwired to make mistakes because our brains are quite lazy. We make shortcuts all the time. Now, we compensate for that by usually having other parts that understand things like social rules and social situations. You know, if somebody says something to you and you think, oh, that was a bit off, you then have a skill set to say, what are you thinking? A great colleague of mine once said, I won't name him because he's an academic as well, but he has a diagnosis. And when he was working through the process, he said to me, sometimes now I've learned a skill and you actually helped me with it. And I thought, oh, not sure I did. And he said, yeah, you said always to clarify with people if you're confused about their emotional state. That whole idea of empathy and connection. I said, yeah, maybe. He said, no. Now I'll often ask people, even my own kids, was that meant to be funny? How are you feeling at the moment? When he gets a little confused about people's emotional state and what they said, incongruence is what we would call it in the world. And if you think about it, the world is a chaotic place enough for people.
Right.
Take it now. Can I use an example? And I won't be political. Fake news, being bombarded with information, social media. It's hard enough for so-called neurotypicals to actually try and process that and take all the discrepancies. What's the truth? How do I filter through this information? And the internet's a good analogy. We are now bombarded so much on the internet with information that we are, all of us, seeing the world as more unpredictable and unsafe because we don't know how to filter and process that information. Now magnify that, and that gives you a good understanding what a lot of the neurodiverse people think and feel like pretty much all of the time. So I'm kind of looking at how this, and amongst some other collaborations in the future, that we can really produce something at the end of this. We're going to take the transcripts from it. We're going to then try and see if we can't hopefully turn it into some kind of monograph in the future. Don't worry, anyone who if we will give ourselves a go, but anyone who's attending, they will get access to getting the materials afterwards as well. But it's really about getting people to think, because I say it about everyone, and it's a pejorative, we're pretty lazy in how we process information. Occam's razor, the principle in science, it's not always simplify, but it's how our brains work. I'll just go to the laziest simple explanation, which explains the things about prejudice, explains a lot about race, that we go for the oversimplistic explanation, and then once it's repeated enough, we start believing it. So to me,
right, and our brain predicts these things, right? I mean,
starts to predict that's what's going to happen next.
Right.
You know, I find them all fascinating, these speakers, in a different way, from authenticity, and particularly as well, my biases around some of the things that Peter talks about is because Peter is also someone who isn't afraid to be controversial. Yeah, you know,
I don't know anybody else like that. Certainly nobody from your neck of the woods.
I once referred to him as the second best autism practitioner I ever met. So this is when we're getting to know each other. And he's a very smart guy. He beautifully fell into the trap and went, "What do you mean second best?" I said, "Well, obviously I'm here." That's my kind of way of joking. He's never let me forget it, that somebody who's an expert in low arousal, he said, "For an expert in low arousal, you seem to also be an expert in high arousal, Andy." And I said, "Yeah, well, you kind of, to know not to push people's buttons, you've got to have a bit of skill in being able to do it." And his answer to me was, "No, I don't think that's correct." So these are people that I think are authentic. Kelly, the first time I heard her was at a conference in Canada, and she blew my mind. Genuinely, I sat there. It was quite interesting because I'd been on for a whole day before her, and I am an entertainer. That's when you say clinical psychologist, I'm now thinking, should I say part-time actor? I'm not, or entertainer, because I like people to think, talk about very difficult things and have fun. So I'm reasonably slick. And I remember Kelly was going on the next day. I'd heard such great things about her. And she actually said, "Well, I always, even now, I like, to know my audiences." And I said, "That's okay. And you've been told that she said, "Well, you've not been told that you're quite mouthy. I've seen it for the last day, Andy." So I said, "I will make you a promise, Kelly. I will come in mid-morning and I'll sit at the back and I'll ask you a few questions at the end. Simple as that, okay? Because we're colleagues." So you can guess what happened, Guy. 8:30 a.m. I had my front row seat with my pen. I didn't ask lots of difficult questions. And I just sat there smiling at her. And it was incredibly engaging. And actually, yes, there was science to her approach, but there was also just authenticity. So interestingly for us, I've heard of Rachel. Kelly's doing work with her, and she said she must talk on this as well. Absolutely. I'm like in awe of them, these guys. If they say, "Can we have this person on here?" It will complement the pragmatic skills around sensory approaches, which is one of Rachel's areas as well. Then I'm hoping at the end of this, Guy, that we have a diverse audience where they actually are leaving with something that gives them a sense that they've maybe learned something is too strong, but maybe has given them things to think about in their day-to-day work or when they're working with their kids or adults that might be helpful. My golden rule is, yes, we should entertain people, or make them feel good about themselves, because a lot of it is about affirmation, about practice, not all bad, but it's also about getting people to just think about things that they might come up with solutions themselves. And I think the one thing when I looked at the program for this guy was, this is about encouraging people to demystify some of these processes that we take for granted every day.
Mm-hmm.
When that child has a meltdown, we shouldn't just immediately say that's behavior, that's attention. We should be thinking much smarter than that, at a much more micro level, about how's that kid even processing that information. Or one of our loves, when somebody raises their voice to someone. I was in a school recently, I won't name it, that I don't think require any training whatsoever. The head just said, we have a rule in this school, it's for kids with special needs. There's no excuse for a teacher ever raising their voice. And she had little reminders up everywhere. They were some of the most regulated classrooms I've seen, and they weren't particularly large. It was a nice environment that the kids were going to, but it's just a simple rule. And I said, you're interested in low arousal training. What in the name of God, why? You've got one of the central tenets. We should regulate ourselves first, and we create a regulated room. And I think that's going to be part of our integrated theme here. I want people to leave thinking, yeah, maybe I can take some of this stuff on board. Maybe it'll help me answer questions.
Or provide something that you mentioned kind of everybody being a potential audience for this. And what I always think about, whether it's the live events that we do or doing an event like this, is, creating something that no matter who you are, you can share with someone else. If you're doing this work professionally, that you can share this with another colleague. If you're a parent, that you can share this with an educator working with your child. I think the potential for that's really high. As I was listening to you talk about this, I also see that connection here as we kind of weave through from Peter into Kelly into you and talking about this and
Rachel
and Rachel, kind of this idea that, Peter focusing on these ideas around, safety. And of course, we are often known to talk about kind of, safety really being a prerequisite to so much else. You don't, when it comes to schools, you don't learn if you don't feel safe. When it comes to, safety, it's really critical and foundational. Of course, that safety you feel in that external world is so connected to the internal feelings and sensations, and kind of getting into the work of Kelly and Rachel and kind of understanding the how do I feel, and the idea of being able to understand and interpret and understand differences that people may have in interoception. And of course, getting to your work in low arousal, all of this ties together. And of course, when someone does not feel safe in the world, that's when we see dysregulation. That's when we see stress behavior. That's when we see individuals that then need our low arousal approach, which can be quite co-regulating when you're really doing that in a way that's supportive. So I think that the connectivity between these speakers is really exciting, and the impact that something like this can have, I think, is really exciting as well.
And you're absolutely right, and it fits within that ethos of, if we can make, in a sense, things a little bit less chaotic for people and predictable. My message, the reason why I'm going last, is to actually say, look, you're not trying to fix your child. You're not trying to fix neurodiversity. People are, as Jim Sinclair said years ago, we're not broken versions of you. Please respect the difference. I apply that to behavior, which is, if I can think about the fact of this person may well be in chaos, and actually I can help in that situation. Often the phrase, Guy, I use a lot in crisis situations, is less is often more. The low arousal mantra, that I could destroy our training with two simple mantras. When in doubt, shut your mouth. Stop talking. Shh. I've been saying that since the 90s. Shh. I've done it in practice because, look at me, Mr. Talker here, larger than life. If I'm working with someone with complex challenges, you'll see me turn into a hermit, and it actually happens. Focus on that person. So there's lots of things we can look at. One of my recent tricks that I'm interested in is, it's quite hard if you're working with someone who's quite challenging and your attention is drawn to your own mobile phone all the time. How can you be there? And if you're not there and focused on supporting that person, then you're going to get hurt. It's inevitable. You're in a higher risk category. So I'm starting to think about that path to regulation with what these guys are saying. Simple things, but some of these things are really simple. Like, Kelly telling me about ice cold drinks that people should drink sometimes for literally their cooling properties and their sensory properties. And I listened to her saying that years ago and thought, that is so simple. Why didn't I think of that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm now going to have to credit her with that as her idea.
Yeah.
The same with Peter about talking about, different contexts. And it's okay to behave in different contexts. One of his things that's liberating for parents is, my son's terrible at home and stressed, but he's quite regulated at school. Yeah, and that can be two different contexts. My behavior at home is different to what it is like at work. And it can be quite liberating for people to understand that. In fact, recently, to give you an example, I was actually talking to a school that said your program is very successful, but it's too programmed. Because what's happening is this young man is getting through the day. You're not seeing many behavioral issues, but you're also inadvertently stressing him so much that by the time he gets home, he's like a ticking bomb. So is it possible to regulate? Maybe you take your foot off the gas a little bit in school, not stop, just a little bit down a notch. And maybe there's a better chance that he will make the transition home and regulate. And a lot of this stuff I've got practically from these and many other guys in their work. So I'm the kind of collaborations I do now, Guy, I'm kind of wanting to connect the dots up for some people, and say, look, listen to some people who are smarter than I am and actually listen to.
I use that phrase a lot, by the way, because there's a lot of people out there that are smarter than I am, and the ability to be able to hear people like Peter and Kelly and Rachel and you.
It's also good if people debate. One British thing that I like, and it's kind of something I've noticed culturally at conferences and events, that people have lost the skill to be friendly, but to debate with each other. So the other thing we're going to do on this is, and it's not a risk, Guy, is with that awkward bit at the end and people post questions and we'll do that. But also each presenter and yourself is going to be encouraged to kind of not poke fun, but challenge the other people, and the audience should hear that. Because I think people have lost the idea that it's okay. We learn not just by agreeing, we also learn by convergence, and we learn by sometimes respecting a difference. I've criticized some of Peter's work about, this model could be oversimplified by people too much. Yeah. Prediction errors is a very attractive thing, but he also applies this work to things like happiness, how we promote that. Kelly will be there straight away with, what does happiness feel like in your body? Do you know? No. Actually, I probably don't, actually. So to me, the sort of work that they're both linked to, we are getting to the stage now that in 20 or 30 years, our knowledge of neuroscience will get us to the level where this stuff is just accepted as day-to-day common practice. And I think, teachers should be interested in this. People who work with adults should be interested in this, not just people on the spectrum, people who've got traumatized individuals they support. And of course, individuals themselves with many of these labels will be encouraged to come as well. So to me, it's something you've said before. The work we do a lot more around safety and keeping people safe is part of the misperceptions we have of people. You've given some examples before that I've heard you give. That person turns into a monster that we demonize because we're actually dysregulated, frightened and scared. And suddenly we call a meeting about the person's behavior. And I just think that these and other kind of events, I've been encouraged by, somebody said to me last year, she was a parent. Now, I don't, me, I'm a lot more empathic than I let on sometimes, but she actually sent me an email saying, it's really, the last event you did, it was a Studio 3 webinar, has really helped me with my son. Thank you. And you go home, you don't punch the air, you sit there and go, Because like most people, like myself with my profile, we don't take compliments very easily. And I can go into a whole webinar we could do together on Irish culture, and rearing and child rearing practices and attachment and all of that stuff, but I won't.
Yeah, that's probably another webinar.
That's another one we could do, really.
That's right. That's right. So this event is coming up on Thursday, the 24th of October, and you chose a time here to make it friendly for us across the pond over in the U.S. So while this is being held from 5:30 to 9 UK British Standard Time, that is, and help me out here. Are we about 5 hours difference here on Eastern Standard Time?
Hours. Eastern Seaboard, 5-6 hours.
Yep.
Western Seaboard about 9 or 10. It'd be about 9. So that would be somebody can get up in the morning if they've got the will and they could tune in and listen to this live and engage from it from the whole West Coast as
Gotcha.
well.
And when people, and of course, when people go ahead and sign up for this, and there's a place down here where they can register, and I know we have the price here in euros, but it's automatically converted behind the scenes, as I recall.
Don't worry about it.
Yep. So when somebody signs up for this, they'll of course get the invitation to join the event live. Is the event also available after the fact as a recording, or what else will they have access to?
For anyone who's worried and they signed up for it and they want to do that, we will send them a recording afterwards as well. We've actually just had you can't please everyone in the world, Guy. I just had a communication from some Australian colleagues, and one of them said, "Do you know what time that we're going to have to get up to listen to this?" And I said, "You didn't read the small print. If you register, you'll also get the podcast, and then you'll get we'll have this special filtering of questions after you've watched it you can send through." So it's one of those interesting things about the world and what the sweet spot time is between the two time zones. So I'm quite curious, and actually I do have a challenge. I know you have an awful lot of listeners from around the world, and you have a lot of people from particularly the States is one of your core areas.
Sure. Canada. Yep.
And just to be clear, we've had quite a lot of Canadians sign up. So I'm not trying to create any kind of race rivalry here, but your Canadians are well ahead of some of you Yanks on here at the moment. Just letting you know. No pressure on you.
So you're hearing that if you're listening live and you're US based is we need a little more representation here. There might be something in this for us at the end here. I mean, come on. Speaking of which, in all reality, I did want to share with people because this is really important. When you asked us to help out with this event, one of the things that you talked about was not only participating and helping to host. But a certain percentage of the proceeds are going to support the Alliance as well, which, again, to our supporters, U.S.-based or otherwise. I mean, I don't care if we lose the race. If we get, I'd like to see some of our Australian and New Zealand friends get signed up as well. And
I'm thinking about some of the things, and we're talking about that at the moment, where we're actually starting a collaboration in Australia. And the only reason why the collaboration halted was of lockdown, COVID, but also I used to joke to my Australian colleagues, you're too damn far from anywhere. It's a long way. That's the usual joke. But actually, we've had pushback on it. And I think, if the more we can connect people, because we learn from what people are doing in other cultures. I'm talking to a colleague in South Africa at the moment who some of the stuff they're doing is amazing, given they have no financial resources whatsoever in the work they're doing. So they're thinking out of the box. So I think for me, the Alliance's work, and I'm going to plug it now here unashamedly, is I think the work you do, and there are sister organisations, how important it is because you're trying to nudge an agenda, and sometimes a nudge is all it takes. Here's the analogy. Here's one for you, Guy. You've seen the movie, all that scientific movie, Armageddon, Bruce Willis, all those things, yeah? All you got to do is nudge that asteroid a little bit to miss the Earth. What you're doing, we're trying to nudge the agenda to make a very big impact in the end. And I'm with you. I think over the last 20 years, I've seen an awful lot of good changes. But when you talk about things like the Judge Rotenberg Centre and the next god-awful inquiry somewhere, we know we're only as good as not resting on our laurels and saying, hey, aren't we doing well? And I think the work we do is tough, but it's morally right. I mean,
absolutely.
You mentioned at the Judge Rotenberg Centre, electric shock on someone. For God's sake, that's not a scientific argument. It's a moral argument first. If we start going down these dark places, we start locking people away. We start restricting people in their lives. We start doing things. And then our brains, because of the way we have this predictive mind, we then automatically filter and justify what we're doing all the time. It's in our natures. And I think us creating that challenge is part of it. In fact, for our work, Guy, as you said at the beginning, we're probably out to cause a little bit of chaos and disrupt systems a little bit, to say we want you to think. Please think. Don't justify. I think I told you once as an analogy, I've got 4 kids. They've all survived my child rearing practices into adulthood. They're doing pretty well now these days. But I taught my kids to argue. And I've got to be careful what I say here, but one of my son's partners said one Christmas, I said, you're not joining in the debate. And she went, yeah, not really. And I said, is it me or is it everyone? She said, it's all of you. You think it's normal to argue in this way over everything, but actually you don't actually get that angry with each other. You make fun of each other's arguments as well. And I think one of the things we've got to get back in this whole industry is that critical industry and a little bit of fun with it. So my example was, somebody says, I always get asked, have you ever punished your own children? Because I must sound like, Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi combined when I talk to people. And I gave the example of one of my sons that I put on the naughty step once. I felt so bad about it because we had people visiting. I knew darn well when I sat him on it, it wasn't going to work. And I spent the rest of the day making it up to him and possibly the rest of his life, because he doesn't remember it. He was only 2, but he still uses it against me in his 20s.
Well, I mean, again,
remember what you did to me. It was like,
right.
So I tell people, do you know the reason why I put him on the naughty step? Because I was a bit embarrassed at his behavior and I was angry. Yes.
Wait, you were dysregulated? I mean, is that what you're saying?
Totally. Well, I like to think not, but let's just say I've now relied on the feedback of other witnesses to the event, and possibly, perhaps, I might have lost my cool.
Right. And you probably had to rely on that feedback because your cortex, your I mean, you were going offline there. We don't do so well.
I also had another one of my kids once. When they're teenagers and they're driving you crazy. He held up one of my books and said, "Have you read this stuff?" And it shut me up in a microsecond. I said, "What? Huh? It took me 1 minute how our brains work to process that as, that's my boy. But it was actually true. And I think the other thing here is, we're not, in all these talks here, we're not talking about we have all the answers. We're not talking about perfection. But what we're saying is, all of us have some knowledge that might help a little bit.
Right. Well, and again, it's back to, kind of the do the best you can until you know better, do better. I mean, I think about my own parenting journey and what I learned along the way, having a neurodivergent child and kind of along the way, learning things. I mean, I feel like, in a way, before I was doing the reading, I began to discover some of the key tenets of low arousal, just kind of based on experience. And when I began to learn that, when my son was having a hard time, and I would hover over him and I would, raise my voice and, I would follow him, how harmful that was. And when I began to realize, like, take the step backwards, use the calming voice, make yourself smaller. I mean, all of these things. Right. I mean, it made all the difference in the world. So, and again, I mean, there are people out there that, I mean, and unfortunately, we've got a problem in higher ed as well, which I think you would agree with, that much of what's still being taught is decades behind. And we really should be bringing people more up to speed on a lot of what we know today. But, again, the message is always about, take in that information, think about it critically, ask questions, but use it to do better. And there's so much opportunity. So I'm really excited about this event. I think it's going to be a fantastic event. Hopefully we'll get a good group for the event. And of course, whether you're able to watch live or you have to watch the recording, there's going to be some options there. But I'm excited about it, and hope we get a lot of people signing up and joining us for it. Any final words? We're getting to a point to wrap up here, but any final words or ideas or thoughts you have on why people should take that day on October 24th and make sure they're joining us?
I would say, in a nutshell, it's about authenticity and about quite a lot of practice knowledge. And we're here to just also affirm good practice. I don't want people to think this is all about bad practice. Like Guy, you were saying, I think people will recognize many of these things in the brain, body, and relationship that they're actually sort of taking account of. But we want to give them a framework to articulate that to professionals and others as well, and to other professionals, and other groups, because how our brains process information is just a wonder as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. We know so little. And I think if people connect up with one or two people by even joining this event, then that's quite a good outcome for us as well. And as I said, we want to give a significant donation, and that's how we've agreed it, to the Alliance for the good work that you do. Yeah. So that you can, get a few extra things for those volunteers for you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that for sure. Yeah, I'm excited about this. And again, encourage people. You can go, and we put the link in the chat here. Go and sign up, and share it as well. I mean, this is the kind of thing. If you're a parent, you might want to share it with your schools, your teachers. You're a professional. Share it with other professionals. Let's get some people there. And I always feel like these events are such an amazing opportunity to pick up ideas and thoughts and help people kind of make shifts into directions that ultimately are going to benefit a lot of kids, a lot of individuals. So and ultimately themselves. I happen to be a firm believer, and I say this a lot, but I think the same things that we can do to improve outcomes for children, improve outcomes for teachers and staff, the same thing we can do to help provide better outcomes for individuals, perhaps in other settings, residential settings, and other settings, again, can improve the outcomes for staff. This really is about a journey of doing better, and appreciate it. So I want to thank you for joining me today to talk about the event. I'm going to ask you to hang around for a minute. We're going to let everybody else go. Had a number of people that did join us from a few different places. Had Janie here from Maryland, my home area here. Somebody from Illinois. We had also we had our lead Canadian volunteer, Chantel, who actually joined us a couple of years ago. We did a Studio 3 training with Steve, and some folks from your organization. So got some good comments happening here. Great show. Want to thank everybody that joined us here live during the event, and again, encourage you to share this, encourage you to sign up, get a ticket, and join us for the event. And with that, I'm going to let everybody go. And again, if you want to hang around for 1 second, I'll talk to you behind the curtain. But thank you, everybody, and we will see you again next time.